Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about why the liberal arts still matter, even in this day and age. Before we start, please like, share, and subscribe. I'd appreciate that little tweak to the algorithm. Let's dig in. Now, when we talk about the liberal arts, it's important to understand what we're meaning. So let's define it, and let's look at what really falls under the concept of the liberal arts. Because when people hear liberal arts, a lot of times they think, they swing it to one end and think, well, liberal, you mean like Democrats and progressivism and all that kind of stuff, and they think that way. And in today's polarized society, it's kind of easy to understand why they would, but that's not what we mean. Or maybe they swing it a whole different way and think the idea of liberal arts, that's all those classes that are like really weird and like underwater basket weaving and stuff like that don't do anything at all except drown students in debt. It's like, nope, that's not it either. Just like when people talk about capitalism and how you can damage capitalism and turn it into something else and then blame capitalism. That's kind of like what those kind of classes are like to liberal arts. Liberal arts in and of themselves are basically the concept, liberal being free thinking, the idea that humans are at their best when they are free thinkers. Humans are at their best when they're educated and educated well, educated thoroughly, so they can go out into the world and think well, think freely, and not be controlled by any one singular narrative. That's when we talk about the liberal arts, at its core, what it is. Now, I've talked before about the idea of why go to college, just skip it and go into work. And, that's still true. But I've also talked about, if you go to college, you should be alert of what you're going into when you go to college. So this discussion today is going to be focused on that concept of what should I look for when I'm going to a college, especially when they say they're a liberal arts college. What does that mean? What should it look like? What are some warning signs that maybe they don't believe what they say? So let's talk about that. Now, one of the banes of college students' existence, because they don't understand liberal arts, they hop into a college, they just go to college, because they have their major, they have their sport, or they feel like this is a cool place where I could hang out with friends and meet new ones. Those are like driving forces that a 17-year-old has when he or she picks a college. Now, it's okay that they have your major, it's okay that they have your sport, and that it'd be a good place to meet people. That's perfectly cool. When we go to work, that's the same kind of things we're looking for at work. Do we have things that we like there, things that will stimulate us that are related to what we know? Will I be able to get along with my coworkers? That's normal. But it should also help us understand why we should think that way when we go in. Because if you've ever taken a job thinking it would be good, then after about a month or two or three, you realize it really isn't a good fit. Well, why? Probably because either A, we didn't do our homework, or B, they were good at disguising who they really are. So colleges work on the same principle because they're made up of humans. So when humans organize, they do things a certain way. It doesn't matter whether it's a school, doesn't matter whether it's a government, doesn't matter whether it's a job. They just do what humans do. So liberal arts, the concept, we tend to run into it whenever we first sit down as a freshman and we start looking over the 4-year plan, that what does it take to get from 0 credits to 120 credits to graduate? How do we get there? Now, when you're 17, 18 years old, it's dizzying, because the whole thought that I have to get to 120 credits and I can only do it 15 credits at a time. That sounds like it's going to take forever. It's 4 years. But, when you're 17, 4 years might as well be 4 decades. So that's overwhelming. And then you start looking at all the classes that you have to take. Now, in the collegiate structure, you typically have, if you think of 3 bubbles. The first big bubble, you have your general electives. And those are usually also called the core. So when you talk about your core classes, the core of what? Well, the core of your liberal arts study. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Then you have another bubble, and those are the classes in your major. So however big your major is, whether it's 35 or 55 credits or something in between, that's the size of that bubble. And then you have yet another bubble off to the side, and those are your electives. So after you're done with your core, after you're done with your major, you still have so many credits left over. Those are your electives. Do whatever you want. Take whatever you want. I always advise students to take another major or minor in something, or even 2 minors. That way you're taking classes that will help you later. Another method would be just take classes that look like they'd be fun. They're electives. Take whatever you want. Enjoy it. Have fun. Knock yourself out. But those general electives, that's what we're focusing on today. That's a concept of the liberal arts. Why do colleges have a core group of classes? Well, in the liberal arts mindset is the people at that university, and it's also spread throughout academia in general. The idea is that, look, there are some important courses that every human being, not just necessarily American, but every human being should at least have some idea or understanding of. And by knowing those things, you'll be better suited to be a free thinker. You can see where this is going. So you'll see a lot of classes, let's say, in the humanities, like you'll see maybe art classes, English classes, communication classes, history classes, political science classes. You'll see in the sciences, you'll see whether it's in the social sciences, like maybe a psych or sociology or something like that, or you'll also see it in hard sciences. So you'll have bio, anatomy, chemistry, physics, those kind of things. And maybe you'll see other classes that push beyond those boundaries, that maybe like an intro to business class or intro to marketing or an economics class, things like that. And then, of course, math classes are coming there too, because when you go out into the world, you should have some level of understanding of math. So as you can see, that group of classes gets pretty sizable. And that's why the core takes up the bulk of a college education in a liberal arts college. So this is the most important thing. Well, a lot of colleges, of course, as a side note, have kind of moved away from that model where they've said, we're going to make the course small. Here's a few courses that you should probably have. And then you take a whole bunch in your major. Now, what that's really good at doing is producing people who are super specialized and great at their field. But when it comes to broad thinking, they're not very good at it because they know a lot about their field, but not much about the rest of the world. And usually why that kind of thing happens is because it's not uncommon for a professor to overhear students talking. Why do I have to take that stupid class? Why do I have to take that stupid class? Why do I have to take that stupid class? And they say that all the time because they don't understand, because they're not free thinkers. They don't understand what it means to be a free thinker. They don't understand that there is value in learning history. Famously, we're all aware of the saying that those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. But we're also, still in the idea of the modernists and the postmodernists who are just like, screw tradition. Who needs it? Just forge forward and be progressive and keep progressing. Well, how do you know how to progress if you don't know what's already happened? How do you know to forge forward if you don't know what's already been done? All the things that we've tried and failed at doing, how do we know to swerve away from those dangers? You need to study history. Plus, you should also know from where you came. You should understand who we are as humans, the things that we've done, the things that we've invented, the things that we've conquered, the places where we failed spectacularly. You should learn and understand those things. That's your basic concept of history. And then, of course, like you look at things like your English classes. My goodness, you look at today's, ability to speak well and write well. You can see clearly that English is being just left by the wayside in a lot of institutions. Take your composition 1 and out the door. You're done. No more English classes needed. Well, today's students don't know how to read. They don't even know how to pick up a book. And if they did know, they wouldn't even care to do so. That's because they're not being trained into what is lovely and true and right in the world. And books help unlock that. They help us to wrestle with ideas that maybe we don't agree with, or maybe they help fortify ideas that we already have. And maybe they open new ideas we've never considered. So books are lovely and wonderful, but we don't teach that because, well, let's cut that out of the core. And then you look at the hard sciences. Well, I'm never going to be a nurse or a doctor. Why do I need to take a biology class? Because you should know how the human world works. You should know how the human body operates. You should know how, things, like people are super hype about like let's care about the environment, but let's not take a biology class. Well, why would you not take biology or ecology and then claim that you're a champion of the environment? You should know how the environment works, So it's one of those things that biology is life, the study of life. I mean, why that you think that'd be much more important in people's minds that I should take this to understand life? But we're so focused on thing, we're not focused on grand picture. So again, free thinkers have this wide, broad knowledge of all these different things. It's not just so you can do well on Jeopardy, but it's so that you can understand things in life and you can argue your points well and understand where you are as a human in relationship to other humans, in relationship to the earth, in relationship to the solar system and the universe. Those things all come together to talk about who we are. The second huge benefit that comes along with the liberal arts mindset is it teaches your brain how to think and work. If you're focused on only one task, whatever, you do it over and over and over and over, and it becomes a habit. It becomes ritual. It becomes routine. And you become really, really good at that one task. And your brain is focused at doing that one task over and over. And then try to change that task and see what happens. You try to give up some kind of habit, and it's hard because you're used to being in that always going thing. And it's hard to break free of it. And if your brain has been taught how to think and how to work, it's like a muscle. If you think of it like a muscle, if you only do one certain kind of lifts, you're doing curls and that's all you ever do, and then you got to move something else and it's not the same motion as doing a curl, all of a sudden the rest of your body goes, ow. I mean, you think you're strong because you do heavy weights with the curls, but the rest of your body's like, no, we haven't been trained in this. So you got to lift something and it's using a lot more other muscles and they just say, we're done here. Your brain is the same way. So when you study and take, that art class, it helps your mind recognize those kinds of things and to work in a certain way. And then you take that history class and your mind learns how to work in that certain way and recognize those things. And then you take maybe a theology class and your mind learns to work in that way and recognize other things. As a result, you've got a well-oiled machine of a mind there. It's been lifting at every different weight station around the gym, and it's like pumped up and ready to flex and start to do things. And then you also recognize all these different ways of doing things. So when something comes in into your brain, you see something, you hear something, anyway you have observed something, you say, now, if I were to use my historical mind, I would look at it and think this. If I use my artistic mind, I'd think this. If I would use my mathematical mind, I would think this. If I would think my communicative mind, I would think this. You have all of these different ways of thinking. Again, you're becoming a free thinker. You are now able to accomplish so much more than just a task only. That's why you find people sometimes who are, they pick a trade, they know their trade, they understand their trade fully, and they're excellent at that trade. But then when something comes along in the economics world, they don't understand how to look at it, discuss it, or whatever. I mean, like, how do I fix this? It's like, you can't approach it the same way you do your trade. There is a different way to look at it and a different way to approach it. This way will give you a vision and a vision only. You need to have multiple ways of looking at things. So if something happens, you can see that. Something geopolitical happens on the other side of the world, and we wonder how to react to it. Well, if you only understand one certain way of thinking, you're kind of stuck. You don't have a free thinking mind. And that's a problem that we tend to get when we silo ourselves in anything. It's not just a trade thing, it's anything. So if your mind is only, like, say, one political persuasion, you don't know why you believe it, but boy, you believe it, and you hone in on it and you think deeply those thoughts because you're supposed to, and then something comes in from another way, you don't know how to answer it. You don't know how to respond because your mind is so focused. It's not free. Now, free does not mean like baby boomers in their hippie worlds of being like free love and free everything, just open your mind to all things, and just accept all things. That's not free thinking either, because that's free feeling. Free thinking does allow your mind to receive input from around and then make judgments upon it. Like, that's a good idea. That one is not. That's what a free thinking mind would do. Free feelings, like, oh yeah, feels good, do it. And that was the whole concept of the baby boomers in the 60s. If it feels good, do it. And what a disaster that's been, in America and around the world. You can really trace American greatness downfall, at the baby boomers, and watch it just plummet after that. Because now it's like super hypercharged, like the selfishness has become like full-blown narcissism at this point in history. But the idea that, if it feels good, do it. Again, the focus is on the feels. Like, what about think, though? Would it be a good idea to embrace that? Or that? Or that? When you drive around town and you see people with those yard signs in the front and say, in this house, we believe, and almost always one of the lines says, love is love. It's like, well, it sounds good. I mean, doesn't it? That people should love each other and we should recognize that love is a good thing. Well, yeah, as a feeling, yeah, it's a good idea, but let's think it through. What does love is love mean? It means love, you should be able to love whoever you want. Oh, does that mean a man and a man, a woman and a woman? Well, yes, it does. Okay, does it mean a man and two men? Well, what do you mean? Well, hey, but you should love who you want. What about a woman and a child? No, I mean, that's not what your sign says love is love. And you just said that you should be able to love whoever you want, So you can see if you get past the feeling into the thinking and start recognizing, that idea is actually a bad idea. Maybe we should think of something else. And you should start realizing that there's more out there to think about, and other people who've tried certain ideologies and they didn't work, and maybe we should move on. Certain people who have tried other ideologies and they work really well, and maybe you should go further. And we should be willing to look at all these different things with a supercharged mind that's been taught from all these different fields. So the idea of sitting in a class and going, this is worthless, why I have to sit in this class? I'm going to go study my thing. That class is helping you think of your thing in an entirely different way. This class is helping you think of your thing in an entirely different way. This class is helping you think of your thing in an entirely different way. That's why we focus on a liberal arts education. Because, when I talked about in my other episode about just going and doing your thing, I said, just get out there and do it. But I said the big thing is you have to be willing to do this stuff on your own. College forces you to do it because students are not going to take those classes on their own. They have to be kind of forced into it. And if you have the self-determination to read these things on your own and dig into them, you should be okay. But if you don't have that, then college would help you by forcing you to read them to understand that there's more outside your own little window. So on my shelf back here, I've got an economics shelf where I've got Adam Smith and Karl Marx. It's like, you got Marx on your shelf? Yes. I need to understand Marxism. If I'm going to go after Marxism, I have to understand what it is first. I can't just say Marxism bad and not understand why it's bad. So you have to read it and understand it. So I've got stuff on my media shelf over here, stuff I agree with wholeheartedly and stuff I disagree with wholeheartedly. Why? Because I need to know why I believe what I believe, and I need to understand it. So I need to wrestle with competing thoughts and ideas. But I do have an economics shelf, which is weird because I'm not a math guy, but it informs a lot of this stuff. Like when I'm talking about communication and culture, whether you like it or not, is driven by economics. I mean, like, can you afford to go buy a new $1,500 iPhone? Can you afford to do this? Can you afford to say the wrong thing on social media and make a mistake and have it ruin your life and reputation? Afford. I'm talking about like economics. You break down economics into its root terms. It's talking about the affairs of the house. So that comes into not just math, but how we act and how we perceive things. Again, I wouldn't know this if I didn't study more and understand more and be willing to open my mind more and have a much broader idea and have this part of the mind going, oh, don't do that. And this part going, oh, why not? And then they wrestle with each other. And then you can become a truly free thinker. So when you go look at colleges and they say, we're a liberal arts school, look at their core. Is it large? Is it robust? Does it have a wide variety of courses in all those areas that maybe you really don't want to study, but will help you in the long run, believe it or not? Or is it just some real small little thing that you just pick and choose a few of them and then you're done? That's not liberal arts. You should have a wide choice. And then when you look at your major, do you see a wide variety of courses across your major? Or is there just a handful that they just force everybody into these certain things and you will take these and that's it? Again, you should be looking for broad, wide, opportunities that you can, understand how to become a better thinking person, to know what you do, to learn what you don't know, so you can think about those things differently and then move forward. That's the heart of a liberal arts education. It has nothing to do with politics. It's got everything to do with you being a free thinking individual with a muscular, energized mind that's hit every station in the gym that's ready to go out there and work. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.